Thank you all for coming out here, and I guess I'm thanking myself at the same time for saying thanks to the BHA for having this event and allowing me to talk about this. We're really open about what we do. We enjoy talking about it because our main goal is to get others involved in this and to do the same thing we're doing. We do not want to do this alone. Get a drink here. So I'll start out with an icebreaker. When is a door in an old house no longer a door? When it's ajar. Don't make me leave when it's ajar. I'll do better. For those of you who do not know me, I am Daniel Shew, and my wife Monica and Rory own a business called Shew Property Holdings, LLC. We're all about old houses, Bristol, and improving our community. We own 17 properties in Bristol, Virginia, all predating 1925, and we are in the process of closing on our first school, which will be made into lofts. We like to believe we're making a positive impact in Bristol in a large way. We've gone as far as buying all but one house on a whole street and are currently working on those. And this is just the beginning. I'm here tonight to talk a bit about what we do, just a bit. As Sid said, you're being baited, but more so about how we got started. So in 1988, my parents bought their first home, but this was not your normal suburban home. It was a 1920s bungalow in a holler, how you like that word, in Meadowview, very close to Saltville, Virginia. But this house was missing something. It was missing a roof. Yes, their first home was a hollowed out shell ravaged by a fire just a few months earlier. We lived next door in the rental house at the time of the fire, and I have vivid memories as a 4-year-old looking out our kitchen door watching that house burn. Mom and Dad were very excited to own and rebuild their first home as they had been renters since 1968. And they may have been more excited to have a new thing to them, a working bathroom, because I was potty trained on the toilet of an outhouse 50 feet from our rental property. And that rental house only had plumbing for a kitchen sink. They didn't have much money, but they had vision and they had energy. On days when we went over to work, Mom said that you could see me with a plastic wheelbarrow, loading up little shovels full of soot and burnt wood and taking it out into the yard to help them. This house never became a mansion, and it had no historical significance, but it was home. That house and my parents' vision made me realize at an early age what could be accomplished with a little hard work and vision. My parents loved antiques also. In that house, in the holler, my dad would find rough-looking pieces of furniture and refinish them, making family heirlooms. I always thought their things were nice, but never quite grasped the deep interest they had until a tour of the Martha Washington when I was 13. My sister Rhonda had arranged this tour thinking that her daughter, Brittany, which was my niece, would enjoy this. And despite the bellhop thinking that we were bored out of our skulls, we did enjoy it very much. And as he told the history of the hotel, and it was combined with all the beautiful things in it, suddenly those antiques, like my parents loved, came to life in this atmosphere. After that day, I saw my parents' passion for antiques and old things in a new way. These things were not just decor inspired by Westerns or some look from the cover of a magazine. They were tangible connections to the past with very memories embedded in the fiber of the wood. They told stories with their worn finishes and construction, the smell of them, the feel, and sometimes even the sound evoke subtle yet powerful ideas and feelings from a time that I could not physically go to. Also, around age 13, my mother plucked me from the public school system and enrolled me in a private school that could be completed through correspondence, allowing me to do that from home. In essence, a homeschool. She began working at a friend's antique shop in Saltville called Kinfolks. As a teen, I thoroughly enjoyed going with her, and after my schoolwork was finished, we would walk around the antique shop. It's a little slow, nice cold winter day, and we'd walk around and enjoy all the wonderful things in the display cases and research them and pull out magazines and look at these cool old houses, which we did not own. Now, by age 15, feeling like a lifetime had passed since I was 13 and toured the Martha Washington, I became immersed in historical architecture and checked out innumerable books from our library on the subject that year. I started reading Colonial Homes magazine and Victorian Homes magazine, and even some country living at my sister's house when I visited. And that was Dee Dee, by the way. I have two wonderful sisters. I learned from those magazines all the different styles of furniture that would correlate with these homes that I was researching. Sometime before my 16th birthday, Mom's friends, Tim and Debbie Crawford, who owned the antique shop in which she worked, purchased a large 1820s home in, near Love's Mill in Washington County, right outside Glade Spring, right outside Chilhowie, really small area like the place I grew up in. Their plans to restore this home included my mother. Mom agreed to work for them and implement her knowledge on this house. And almost every day for 6 months, she and soon I painted, removed plaster from brick, and stripped finishes from old floors. Tim did not want the floors sanded, so we got down, Well, that's it. So now I've got the clicker. Tim did not want the floor sanded, so Mom and I got on our hands and knees with razor blades and paint stripper and stripped the finish off, lightly sanded them, and applied a finish. She taught me what she had learned over the years, and we both applied that knowledge with the Crawfords' instruction to restore that beautiful home. Our favorite thing on a cold January day was to hear a noise in another part of the house. After all, ghosts are part of that history too. This was an amazing time in my life, and this restoration stuff really began to stick. A few years go by, and my parents had finally found an 1880s house that they worked on and made into a home and a place to display their collection. I opened an antiques mall in Glade Spring, housed in the former Swiss Inn restaurant, which was an 1835 house owned by my sister Rhonda. She and her husband had toured the house, and she liked it, and he said, "What are we going to do with it?" And she said, "I have no idea, but I want it." And I took advantage of that empty building. And then a year later, I moved my shop to a large building on Main Street in Abingdon, which I stayed at for 7 years. My mother, of course, came to help every day, traveled 45 minutes from Saltville, and Dad brought his tools, and we built walls, and we made that building shine. Around this time, I also met Monica, and we began our journey together. Around this time, I also met Monica, and we began our journey together. Monica also came from a background of antiques and hands-on experience in home renovation. She spent time in her childhood being part of the 5 Yesterdays program in Old Salem, North Carolina, which is right there. Coincidentally, the home of my family for over 100 years before they moved to Glade Spring in the 1870s. Her parents enjoyed working with their hands and remodeled their home when she was young. The Halseys also loved antiques and had quite a collection. She even inspired her grandfather to restore an old log house commissioned by her great-grandmother to house farmhands in the 1920s. There's a story her dad told us when he was a young boy of them sleeping on that front porch, and about 3 a.m., they all thought they were moving, but it wasn't vertigo. The porch was actually sliding off the house. When we married in 2011, we purchased our first home together. It was an 1898 Queen Anne. It was not a Queen Anne. It was of the period Queen Anne, but it was a Victorian home. We think that house was built by an older couple because after touring a few houses in Abingdon, we understood that it was built very much on the style of a house from around 1845 in Abingdon, but it was in fact only 1898. And this house was not a grand palace, but it was lovely, and it was home. We worked on the already very nice house until we became bored. The house had been remodeled by a local contractor, and he lived in it. So if you want some good construction, you buy a house that a contractor lived in. You know it's done right. I had sold my business in 2013 and became a realtor, which was actually my original dream. At night, I viewed homes online for clients, and upon expanding searches to the Bristol area, which in my childhood you only came to for the mall, I started to find very interesting things myself. We saw great deals on houses in Bristol, Virginia, and fell in love with the diverse architecture here. We knew we had to move, so we began to think about the future. During this time, a couple of events took place in our lives that were rather unpleasant. To simplify it, a job loss and an attack on our character created some financial instability that two newlyweds were not prepared for. We ended up meeting a nice man named Ed Harlow, who was the former mayor here in Bristol, who agreed with no down payment and not knowing us at all to finance a small house to us on Lawrence Avenue. And by financing that to us and allowing us to start all over here, that kept us from losing our home in Abingdon because we rented it to someone who cared for it for a little while before we sold it, and that changed everything for us. A little time passed, and things began, as they always do, to look up. After recovering from the near devastating events that took place in Abingdon, we paid off that little house and started thinking about our future once again. We also, of course, sold that house in Abingdon. That's our little house on Lawrence. The house next door to that house, as you can see in that photo, we noticed was a little distressed. The lady that lived there was very kind. She was sweet. We only saw her 2 times on the front porch, but always waved at us. But Monica said, "I hate washing dishes." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I have to look at that house." So we, unfortunately, some changes took place in that lady's life that began to influence us. She had lived there for 30 years and rented it for 30 years, and her children had just purchased this house for her. So she was a homeowner for 3 months before she died at age 90. They had remodeled a few bathrooms and began some changes on it to make a better place for her to live. So her son approached me and asked me if we would be interested in buying it. And I reluctantly told Monica, because I was still recovering from trauma, recent trauma, of trying to do better for myself and thought that it only got you bad things. And so she decided that we were buying it, and we moved forward with it. So her son approached me and asked me if we would be interested in buying it. I reluctantly told Monica, and so she decided that we were buying it. We began working on this new house, and we went from going upside down on our mortgage to owning 2 houses. A little Bristol success story. In the process of renovating, Monica discovered she was pregnant. We'd been told for 3 or 4 years that we probably wouldn't have children, but God had a different plan. We moved into the newly remodeled house, and we made it home. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about it, except every room looked like that floor I was standing in. The railing that's missing off of the porch, I walked over the day we closed and leaned up on the porch to sort of breathe in this new experience, and the railing fell out from my hands and I almost went off the porch. It was like the Money Pit movie. So after Rory was born, and I had spent some more time in Bristol, I got to know the streets better and wanted to see some changes, which I'm sure a lot of people did. I think the change, some of you all that's lived here longer may know more, but I believe the change in Bristol probably started in the 1950s when the grand old houses on Solar Hill were no longer that interesting to people, and suburbs popping up everywhere was the place to be. So downtown started to change, and some of these houses were made into boarding houses, and many of them were split up into apartments, which I'm learning. Some houses that were 3,000 square feet had 8, 10, 12 apartments, and maybe even more. I've heard stories about houses on Solar Hill that had chain link fences down the hallways to separate apartments. Yeah. So I'm sure that people thought there was a change that needed to take place. So many of these beautiful houses in town were vacant or in distress. And I realized I did not have the millions it would take to single-handedly take this on, but as a real estate agent, maybe I could help the community by finding people for these homes and calling these people that owned them and talk them into buying them, which was kind of a long shot because I know my parents used to do that out in Washington County, and they were turned down every time they would call about an empty house. So, about the same time that I was thinking about this, my friend Scott Otis, who I'd known for probably 10 years, called and said that he would like to sell his house, the, I believe, 1867 Vicky Fowler house, that he had been working to restore for a few years. So we listed it, got that sold to the Mitterays, who have made that into a remarkable property. And so after we closed, I talked to Scott and told him my idea, and he started getting me phone numbers for people in the neighborhood for these distressed houses. And I began making phone calls, and much to my surprise, people were very interested in talking about selling these properties. Apparently, these homeowners had reached the point themselves where they were tired of owning their houses. And Scott, let's see here, make sure I get all this correct. Well, after he gave me the phone numbers, I began making them. And there was one phone call that would change everything about our future and perhaps change the face of some neighborhoods in Bristol forever. So I jumped on the phone and I called Monica, which was working at the time. Now she works for our business. And I said, "You're never going to figure out what I found out. This is going to just shock you to death. And the rest of it you're going to have to hear at the Christmas luncheon." Good afternoon. Glad you came out and believe in BHA, and maybe 2 or 3 of you came out just to hear me. I don't know. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Daniel Shew. My wife Monica and I own a business called Shew Property Holdings, LLC. We are all about old houses, Bristol, and improving our community. We own 17 properties in Bristol, Virginia, all predating 1925. And we are in the process of closing on our first school that will be made into lofts. We like, I knew I shouldn't have eaten before I got up here. We like to believe that we are making a positive impact in a large way. We have even gone as far as buying all but one house on a whole street. And we are currently working on those, but that's just the beginning. I'm here tonight to talk a bit about what we do, but more so about how we got started and where we are today. For those of you who were not at the library, this is touching on some of what you missed there. In 1988, my parents purchased their first home, but it was not your normal suburban home. It was a burnout shell of a 1920s bungalow in Meadowview, Virginia. It's technically Clinchburg, Virginia, right between Meadowview, Saltville, and Glade Spring. Yes, our first home was a hollowed-out shell ravaged by fire just a few months earlier. We lived next door in the rental property, and I remember at 4 years old sitting on the car hood with a blanket watching this house burn nearly to the ground. Mom and Dad were very excited to rebuild their first home, and maybe more excited to have indoor plumbing, because I was potty trained in an outhouse. They didn't have much money, but they did have vision, and they had energy. On most days, you could see me out there with them with a plastic wheelbarrow, shoveling up soot and taking it to the yard for pickup. That house never became a mansion and had no historical significance, but it was home. That house and my parents' vision made me realize at an early age what could be accomplished with some time and some hard work. My parents also loved antiques. In that house in the holler, my dad would find rough-looking pieces of furniture and refinish them and create beautiful pieces, family heirlooms actually. I never quite grasped the deep interest they had in antiques, although I thought they were lovely, until my sister took us on a tour, my niece and I, of the Martha Washington at age 13. Despite the bellhop thinking that my niece and I would not be interested in this tour, we were very excited and hung on his every word. And it was there when I saw the history of this property and its beauty combined with these antiques that my family loved, I started to understand what all this was about. After that day, I saw my parents' passion for antiques and old things in a new way. These things were not just decor inspired by westerns or a look that came from a magazine, but they were actually tangible connections to the past with memories embedded in the very fiber of the wood. They told stories with their worn finishes and construction, the smell of them, the feel of them, and sometimes even the sound would provoke subtle yet powerful ideas and feelings from a time that I could not physically touch. Also, around age 13, after the Columbine shooting, my mother plucked me from the public school system and enrolled me in a private school that could be completed through correspondence, allowing me to be home, in essence, a homeschool. She began working at a friend's antique shop in Saltville, and I would tag along with her. I remember we would, on many cold winter evenings, we would go through the shop and look at things because it was very busy, and we'd read all the magazines and just nestle in there for the day with history. Now, by age 15, feeling like a lifetime had passed since I was 13 and had toured the Martha Washington, I began to become immersed in historical architecture and checked out innumerable books at the library on the subject. I read Colonial Homes magazine, Victorian Homes magazine, and even some country living when I was at my sister's house. I learned from these magazines all the different styles of furniture that went with these beautiful houses that I loved. Sometime before age 16, my mom's friend Tim and Debbie, who owned the antique shop we worked at, purchased an 1820s house in Chilhowie, Virginia, near Love's Mill. Their plans, of course, to restore it included my mother, a jack of all trades. Mom agreed, and almost every day for 6 months, she had, and soon I, painted, removed plaster, stripped finishes from wood floors with a razor blade, and all kinds of laborious tasks. She taught me what she had learned over the years, and we both applied that knowledge with the Crawfords' instruction to their home. This was an amazing time in my life, and this restoration stuff was really starting to stick. A few years go by, and my parents had finally found their old house, an 1880s house that they worked on and made into their home, and a place to display their collection. An 1880s house that they worked on and made into their home, and a place to display their collection. I opened an antiques mall in Glade Spring, housing it in the former Swiss Inn restaurant, an 1835 house owned by my sister Rhonda. A year later, we moved to Abingdon in a large building. My mother, of course, came along to help every day, and Dad brought his tools, and we built walls, and we made that building shine. Around this time, I met Monica, and our journey began together. Monica also came from a background of antiques and hands-on experience, in home renovation, that is. She spent time in her childhood being part of the 5 Yesterdays program in Old Salem, North Carolina, in that photo, where, coincidentally, my Dutch family was from before moving to Glade Spring in the 1870s. Her parents enjoyed working with their hands and remodeling their home when she was young. The Halseys loved antiques and had quite a collection. She even inspired her grandfather to restore an old log house commissioned by her great-grandmother for farmhands to live in the 1920s. When we married in 2011, we purchased our first home together, an 1898 Victorian in Abingdon. This house was not a grand palace, but it was lovely and it was home. We worked on that already very nice house until we became bored. And I sold my business in 2013 and became a realtor. At night, I viewed homes online for clients, and upon these searches, I found that Bristol was the most interesting place. We saw great deals on houses in Bristol, Virginia, and also fell in love with the diverse architecture here. We knew we had to move and began thinking about our future here. During this time, a couple of events took place in our lives that were rather unpleasant, so it spurred us to move on to Bristol faster. We ended up meeting a nice man named Ed Harlow, who financed a small house to us on Lawrence Avenue. This allowed us to rent our house out in Abingdon and keep it from being foreclosed on or something, which was not close to that anyway. A little time passed, and we began, as things always do, to look up. After recovering from this near-devastating event, we paid off that little house and started thinking about the future once more. We also sold our home in Abingdon. Now, the house next door, we noticed was in distress. The kind lady that lived there had lived there for 30 years, had rented it for 30 years and had just purchased it a few months earlier for the first time in her life and passed away. I believe she was 90. Her son offered to sell us the property, and we agreed. Monica was feeling a bit more ambitious than I was. I was still recovering from traumatic events of the recent past. We began working on this new house, going from upside down on our mortgage to owning 2 houses. In the process of this renovation, Monica discovered she was pregnant. So we moved into that newly remodeled house and made it our home. I actually fell through that floor. After Rory was born and I had spent more time in Bristol, I got to know the streets better and wanted to see some changes. So many of these beautiful houses in town were vacant or in distress. I realized I did not have the millions it would take to single-handedly accomplish this, but I was a realtor, and maybe perhaps I could contact these owners of these properties and get them listed for sale. At that same time, my friend Scott Otis contacted me. We hadn't spoken in a couple of years, and he was interested in listing his historic Fowler house that he had been working on for a while. After selling his house to the Mid-Arrays, and they've done an amazing job. There they are. After selling his house to the Mid-Arrays with their plans to restore it, he gave me phone numbers for a few folks on Spencer and Lee Street who were interested in selling. I began making phone calls and was getting great response. Hey, this just might work. But there was one phone call that was about to change everything. This call would change our lives and the face of some neighborhoods in Bristol forever. I jumped on the phone with Monica and I said, "You're never going to figure out what I found." Upon calling to list a couple of houses around Lee and Spencer, I came across a gentleman named Chris Stewart. Well, actually, I spoke to his wife, Sarah. She said that he did own those houses on Spencer and Lee Street and that he was interested in selling them. Well, it was working again. These people were actually wanting to sell these houses. I was in shock. He also owned one on Johnson Street. Well, Johnson Street, that rang a bell. You see, Monica and I, before moving to Bristol, had been watching this house on Johnson Street for quite a while. Just couldn't swing it at the time, but it was pretty dreamy. We'd been driving by it on our way to church at Emmanuel every Sunday, but the for sale sign was no longer there. As fate would have it, he did own that house at 211 Johnson Street and wanted to sell it as well. He loved that house very much, and he wanted to make sure that we were a good fit for it. So I was interviewed before the purchase. I called his wife back later, and I said, "Sarah, how did the interview go?" She said, "Did he agree to sell you his house?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Then he likes you." We left our house with central air conditioning that we had just put in to move into a very hot and dreamy house in June 2018. This house was lovely but had no air, and we were paying a much larger house payment, and suddenly 2 tenants in a row with our new rental business moved out. So window unit air conditioners were not the thing that summer for us. When fall came, we began to enjoy our steam radiator system and began working. We removed carpet, we sanded floors, we rebuilt the servants' staircase, and much more. We even turned some unused rooms into an Airbnb, which became quite profitable. We even turned some unused rooms into an Airbnb, which became quite profitable. As our son Rory grew and began walking and talking, our chimneys were reconstructed. And as Rory began to eat solid food, we painted more walls. And then, in the early spring of 2020, we were all locked up and marinating in our cabin fever. I was remodeling the upper porch that overlooked Piedmont, and I noticed our outdoor cat, which was kind of a neighborhood cat, was missing. She spent many hours on our porch, and we even named her Mrs. Norris for her strong resemblance to Filch's cat in Harry Potter. But we knew she spent a lot of time at a neighboring property because they told us that they called her Charlotte. I was very upset over this and posted on Facebook that our cat was missing and I needed help. Our friends came and they posted the status and shared it everywhere they could. And a few days later, as you can imagine, as people shared it, we had a strong lead. A lady in Bristol, Tennessee had found our cat. I viewed the post and couldn't believe my eyes. That was Mrs. Norris. I contacted the nice Tennessee lady, put my mask on, and made arrangements to get her. When I arrived, I was startled by her appearance. She was skinny, she had gummy eyes, and didn't seem to recognize me at all. I guess those days spent traveling were harder on her than I expected. This lack of recognition caused her to bite me when I was putting her in the cage. What was wrong with this cat? I immediately called Monica to laugh and say, "Our beloved sweet Mrs. Norris has drawn blood." Monica, with her bachelor's in biology and 5 years working at the health department, shrieked, "Blood? Yeah, what's wrong with that?" Well, rabies is what's wrong with that. So, I didn't think that was a big deal, but she did. And I knew that even if Mrs. Norris wasn't rabid, they had to put her down to check to see if she did have rabies. We decided we had enough time that maybe I could walk down the sidewalk, talk to these neighbors, and see if perhaps they had had her vaccinated, as we shared this same cat. Yeah, that's what I'll do. End of story. She'll be fine. I'm fine. I brought her home. I did not attempt to let her out of the cage this time. And I strolled down the sidewalk. I walked up, I knocked on the door, and no one answered. As I began to look around the house, I realized the house was actually empty. They had moved. So, another neighbor sitting on her porch said, "Oh yeah, they moved. And by the way, I got her landlord's contact information." Ooh, okay, well, that was getting a little better. Okay, I breathed in with my heart beating a little harder and my wound resembling an hourglass that was running out of sand. Thank goodness he answered when I called. And on the first ring. And he had her number. So I gave him a call. He said she did in fact move, and she had been gone almost the same amount of time Mrs. Norris was missing. He also said, if I did not have rabies, call him back later, and he might sell me the property. Okay, crazy man, I'm probably going to die in a few days, but I'll get back with you if that's the case. So I called Veronica, very nice lady that lived there, and she said, yes, yeah. I had the cat spayed and neutered. I'm sorry, not spayed and neutered. I'll get to that later. I had the cat spayed and vaccinated. Okay. It's turning out to be an okay day after all. I said, well, thanks. And she said, but you don't have Charlotte. I said, yeah, I have Charlotte. I'm positive of that. She said, no, you don't. I'm looking at her. She's sitting on my feet in Saltville, Virginia. So, holy moly. It's getting weird. Thanks, Veronica. I guess I'll see you in heaven. So I ran back outside and I realized Mrs. Norris didn't look like herself because she wasn't herself. She didn't recognize me, and she was actually a boy. Guess it's off to the health department for her. Well, much to my surprise, the health department was a little different than it was a few years ago. And they informed me that I could actually wait a few days. If the cat didn't show any signs, I was okay. So I breathed, and I thought, well, the cat doesn't have any signs, so I guess we're good. I'll think positively about this. Monica wasn't quite so positive. And by the way, the cat made its way back home, and as far as I know, is safe. And Mrs. Norris, Charlotte, is also well, too. So going back in after I decided I was probably not going to die, I called that landlord back and talked to him. So going back in after I decided I was probably not going to die, I called that landlord back and talked to him. He said, well, I'm very excited you're going to live, and I'm very excited you called me back. Now let's make a deal. Our conversation went very well, and I told him that his property was quite close to mine, and we would like very much to have some control over who lived beside us. He was very kind and offered even to finance it, so we didn't have to put 20% down. We bought it within a year, and everything went well. Unfortunately, that house had new windows and vinyl siding, which is something we don't normally do, but we tried to do some detailed work on it to make it look as close to original as possible. Our friendship with that man grew, and his wife, Vicky, and we have since worked on. He said, well, I'm very excited you're going to live, and I'm very excited you called me back. Now let's make a deal. Our conversation went very well, and I told him that his property was quite close to mine, and we would like very much to have some control over who lived beside us. He was very kind and offered even to finance it, so we didn't have to put 20% down. We bought it within a year, and everything went well. Unfortunately, that house had new windows and vinyl siding, which is something we don't normally do, but we tried to do some detailed work on it to make it look as close to original as possible. Our friendship with that man grew, and his wife, Vicky, and we have since worked on many other projects. Sometimes they become a silent partner, and sometimes they're not part of it at all. So back to Spencer Street. This was one of the houses that we bought from Chris Stewart. And we had renovated that house the first time. We've now renovated it twice. And the tenants called one day and said, we're having a rat problem and a roach problem. Well, that was unusual. I didn't see any there when I was working on that house the whole time. So upon visiting with them one evening, I noticed movement on the fence line. And as I watched closely, there were giant rats running to and fro across that fence in the moonlight. Also, my legs were covered with fleas that I had picked up in the yard. It turns out the 100-year-old house next door, being occupied by at least 8 people, was infested with fleas, rats, and bed bugs. The city eventually stepped in and condemned the property and removed the occupants. We knew this was our time to move, and we better do it quick. We placed a call to the owner and quickly purchased it with Gary and Vicky, then bought them out a year later. What we found in that house was beyond shocking. The tenants had been living in that building with no window panes in most of the windows. The kitchen sink had been removed and placed in the backyard so that they could wash dishes. There were 2 large dogs locked on the second floor with no bathroom breaks, and some animal, which we're assuming was a dog, was locked in the basement for so long it chewed a hole through a 2-inch oak door. Little did we know, this was not the last time we would see this type of living conditions in Bristol, Virginia. This house, that previous house, will be finished in February. This is one I'm not really talking about, but that's a recent acquisition. As a matter of fact, 10 minutes after I got here, one of my tenants called and said, "There are fire trucks surrounding your house." Turns out they were at the wrong house, thank goodness. So, Gary had spoken to the landlord about that property that was rat infested. And shortly after we purchased it, he said that that same landlord had contacted him and wanted to sell another property on Park Street. So we jumped on that one too. Fixing these houses and changing these areas was becoming our thing. It was fun, sometimes disturbing, but mostly fun. So sometime in the midsummer, you can click now. Sometime in the midsummer of 2020, my friend Barbara Jo Bunch contacted me and said since I liked Bristol so much, she had some books she would like to give me. She wanted to meet up at Tim Crawford's new antique shop in Chilhowie, not Saltville. Finally, after several COVID scares on both of our parts, we met up and she gave me some lovely books written by Bud Phillips, signed by Bud Phillips too. I was very excited to read them and started that night. The first book I opened spoke in the first chapter about this amazing house in Bristol called the King-Lancaster-McCoy-Mitchell House on King Street. This house was only a block away, and I had no idea it was. I knew it was historic, but I had no idea that all these things went on there. How it was part of a 5,000-acre plantation, how Andrew Jackson had spent time in the home, and how Andrew Johnson had attended a wedding there. And that the lady that started the Margaret Mitchell Spay and Neuter Clinic, see, I told you Spay and Neuter was coming back, lived there for 102 years. I had to walk around this house and check it out. So after Monica dropped Rory at school and went to work, I headed up there. Don't even think I told her what I was doing either. I knew I had to be there. I had a connection with that house unlike any house before. I went to my car immediately. I'm sorry, I'm backing up a little bit. I'm getting ahead of myself. I walked around and knew that we had to have it. I had to be there. I could almost feel the presence of the 38 enslaved people that lived there, nearly hear the many generations of children that played in the yard, and maybe almost thought I smelled a whiff of wood smoke coming from the chimney top. I knew we had to have it. I ran to my car, knowing countless people had tried to purchase this home, but I was going to give it a shot. The only thing is, I knew when I called that something big was going to happen, and it in fact did. I was told that the house couldn't be purchased, but somehow I had called the week that they were accepting applications and restoration proposals so that the house could be transferred to new ownership. Oh, and that we had 3 days to write our proposal. I emailed our priest, Joe Dunnigan, Monica's Aunt Kathy, and my friend Christy McElhaney that works at our church to please proofread all this paperwork we were sending to them immediately. A few months later, after that, I got a call from the university, and he said he was sorry that he hadn't reached out to me and that they had been very busy, but they did pick new owners for the house. I said, well, thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. And he said, well, don't hang up the phone. You're the new owners. So after a giant woo-hoo that could have probably been heard at the library, I jumped on the phone and I called Monica and then I called my parents. We closed in March, and after paying the recording fee, we laughed and nicknamed it our $31 house, because that's how much it costs to record the deed. And we should be there and have the house completed by summer and be the 5th family in 200 years to live there. We have since purchased the rest of the vacant properties on Spencer Street, and they are currently being worked on. We close on the Oak Street School next week, and we have finished restoring Pleasant Hill, the former Bud Phillips home that Flo and Denise so graciously sold to us. And we are not done. We're far from done, but we are not in this alone. We have managed to get others interested, and in that we have renovated or somehow been involved in the renovation of over 40 houses in Bristol, Virginia in the past 5 years. We can't do this alone, and we don't want to do this alone. Caring about historic architecture goes far beyond people that like old houses. You see, the U.S. produces over 145 million tons of construction and demolition debris every year in the U.S. And we know a lot about landfills. That's where this stuff goes. From the Community Toolbox website, an online resource for building healthier communities, contributor Phil Rabinowitz says this: why encourage historic preservation? It preserves the historic, architectural, and aesthetic character and heritage of a community or area, and helps to provide a sense of continuity. As urban sprawl and roadside development make more and more places look the same, it becomes important for communities to keep their identity intact. Even one or two striking historic buildings help define a community and hint to its past as a whole. If whole neighborhoods or rural areas can be preserved, the effect is that much greater. The sense of history can contribute to community pride and to a better understanding of the community's present. Historic preservation conserves resources, reduces waste, and saves money by repairing and reusing existing buildings and building new ones. Reusing a historic structure versus tearing it down and building with new material helps to greatly reduce the carbon footprint of a building also. Workmanship, because many modern buildings are built on the assumption that they will only be needed for a relatively short time, 25 to 30 years, before they're replaced. Workmanship and building methods, but the most significant buildings are not as careful and durable as methods used in the past, when buildings are expected to last indefinitely. By working on historic buildings, new generations of craftsmen learn the techniques to improve. It can add character and charm to a community, its uniqueness. The present old buildings, neighborhoods, and landscapes can determine the look of a community and may be attractive for tourists. If these elements are historically significant or unusual, they can also be a source of community pride and lead to other improvements. It can attract the nature of a deteriorating neighborhood or area. A rehabilitated historic building or neighborhood might be the focus of new residential or commercial development. An area restored to its original appearance could serve as a magnet for tourists. Local residents in rehabilitation or restoration as artisans or workers, if they have skills, or as trainees. In the latter case, by the end, they may have developed competencies as carpenters, masons, the like, to start new careers. That is another thing we have focused on greatly, end of quote, by the way, that Mr. Fraccarosi here he has done amazing things for us when we need very detailed work done. We now have a full-time gentleman that works for us who wanted to start a new career and get out of his 9-to-5. And my cousin's husband, who moved here from outside Nashville, has started a construction company called Solar Hill Construction. So that's pretty local. And he's now working on houses with us. So I hope I have helped you this evening to understand how we got where we are, how the power of thought influences our future, and how important historic preservation is to making healthy communities. But before I close, I want to thank a few people. The people for getting this town to this point. Thank you to people like Carl Moore and all the other helpful hands who restored this amazing building that we're in. The Historical Association on the board for all their efforts in saving the E.W. King House, the Fowler House, and the Preston House. Thank you to Ruth King, who recently passed away, and others like her for her downtown contributions and helping spark interest in restoring all these wonderful buildings where commercial properties are. Thank you also to our residential pioneers. People like Susan and Clyde Long, Florence and Carl Fraccarosi, Nina Rizzo and Neil Staples, and all the others who have paved the way for people like us. Those who made a home when they were surrounded by rundown multifamily units owned by people that did not even live in Bristol. Those that said, I love Bristol and I'm not leaving. Those that stood against the tide and hoped for a day when Bristol would once again be a shining beacon of historic architecture, preserved and maintained. Thank you very much, and let's restore Bristol together.